Story 1: The Girl at the Cemetery. Autumn nights in Lancaster held a certain charm. A blend of crisp air and faint wood smoke that whispered of approaching winter. I'd always found peace in those nights, an escape from the weight of university life. Running was my sanctuary. A ritual I rarely missed. It was 2015. My third year at Lancaster University. And I'd grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of the town. Nestled in northern England, Lancaster was quaint. Its cobblestone streets and old-world charm offering a stark contrast to the sprawling university campus. By then, I'd mapped out every trail and street, seeking solace in my evening runs. That night was no different, or so I thought. The air had a bite to it. The kind that stings your lungs when you breathe too deeply. My usual route led me through Williamson Park. A sprawling expanse of greenery crowned by a butterfly house atop its highest hill. Beyond the park lay something entirely different, a vast cemetery. Ancient and sprawling. I'd passed it countless times without a second thought. The graveyard was beautiful in a morbid sort of way. Old, towering yew trees stretched their gnarled branches toward the sky. And ivy crept over tombstones so weathered their inscriptions were little more than whispers of names long forgotten. At the heart of the cemetery was a crypt. Its stone doors sealed and its surface scarred by time and graffiti. It wasn't the cemetery itself that unnerved me, it was what lay beyond it. Stories of the abandoned mental asylum on the far side were infamous in town. Though long shuttered, it was said that echoes of its grim history lingered. And those brave, or foolish, enough to venture into its ruins often spoke of inexplicable phenomena, shadows moving in the corners of their vision, disembodied voices, and an unshakable sense of being watched. But those were just stories. I adjusted my headphones, letting the pounding rhythm of heavy metal drown out the night as I approached the cemetery gates. The wrought iron stood tall and imposing, its spikes reaching toward the heavens like a warning to the living. And that's when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. She was just a small figure at the edge of the path, motionless against the backdrop of shadow and stone. I slowed my pace, my breath fogging in the cold air, and tugged out one earbud. The girl stood just inside the gates, her pale face streaked with tears. She was dressed in a thin, sleeveless dress, far too light for the biting chill of an autumn evening. Her bare feet were planted firmly on the gravel path, and her small frame trembled. "Hey," I called, hesitant. "Are you okay?" Her head snapped toward me, and I saw the sheer terror in her eyes. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. Her features delicate and childlike. She looked as though she'd been running, or fleeing, from something. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please help me." I glanced around, half expecting to see someone following her. The street was empty, the surrounding houses dark and silent. Beyond the gates, the cemetery stretched into an inky blackness that seemed to swallow all light. "What's wrong? Are you lost?" I asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced back into the cemetery, her wide eyes scanning the darkness as though expecting something, or someone, to emerge. Her hands trembled as she clutched the cold metal of the gate. "Please," she repeated, her voice breaking. "He's coming." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The way she said it, the raw fear in her voice, sent a chill racing down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to leave. But how could I? She was just a child, alone and terrified. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 999. It's okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll call the police. They'll know what to do. But as soon as the word police left my lips, her demeanor changed. Her trembling stopped. And she looked up at me with wide, unblinking eyes. For a moment, it felt as though the world around us had gone completely still. No, she said sharply, her voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. No police. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. But you said you needed help. They can. No, she shouted, stepping back. Her voice was suddenly fierce, almost angry. I froze, unsure of what to do. My mind raced with questions. Why didn't she want the police? Was she in some kind of trouble? Was someone chasing her? Or was she running from something far worse? Before I could ask, she turned and bolted into the cemetery. Wait, I called. But she didn't stop. Her small figure disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the labyrinth of headstones and trees. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I stood there, paralyzed by indecision. Every logical part of me screamed to leave, to run back to the safety of the well-lit streets. But something stronger, a mix of curiosity and dread, kept me rooted to the spot. What if she was in danger? What if someone, or something, was out there? Against my better judgment, I stepped through the gates. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I entered the cemetery. The air felt colder here, heavier, as though the night itself was holding its breath. My phone's flashlight cast a feeble beam, illuminating only a few feet ahead. Hello? I called, my voice trembling. Are you there? Are you okay? No answer. The path wound deeper into the cemetery, and the shadows seemed to grow darker with every step. The rows of tombstones loomed like silent sentinels, their inscriptions barely visible beneath layers of moss and ivy. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. It was the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, coming from somewhere ahead. Hello? I called again, my voice breaking. The footsteps stopped. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam swept over the path ahead, illuminating only more darkness. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted between the trees, too fast to be human. My breath hitched, and I swung the flashlight toward the movement. But there was nothing there. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. My legs screamed at me to turn back, to run. But I couldn't move. Suddenly, a voice whispered from the darkness, soft and chilling. You shouldn't be here. The flashlight shook in my hand as I whipped it toward the source of the voice. The beam caught a figure standing just beyond the edge of the path. It was the girl. She stood perfectly still, her pale skin almost glowing in the faint light. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes fixed on me. Why did you follow me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to help, I stammered. You said someone was coming. Are you in danger? Her gaze shifted past me, toward the cemetery gates. He's still coming, she said softly. Before I could respond, the temperature around me seemed to plummet. My breath fogged in the icy air, and a deep, guttural sound rumbled from the shadows behind her. My body moved before my mind could process what was happening. I turned and ran, the flashlight's beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted back toward the gates. The sound followed me, heavy. Thudding footsteps and a low growl that sent chills down my spine. I didn't dare look back. The gates loomed ahead. And I pushed myself harder. My lungs burning with every breath. I burst through the iron gates and didn't stop running until I reached the brightly lit streets of town. Only then did I dare to glance back. The cemetery was silent and still. The gate standing open as if nothing had happened. There was no sign of the girl, or whatever had been following me. I never ran at night again. The memory of that encounter haunted me. The unanswered questions gnawing at the edges of my mind. Who was the girl? What was she running from? And why did she vanish into the darkness so willingly? I told myself it was just my imagination. That I'd let the eerie setting get the better of me. But deep down, I knew better. Some things defy explanation. Even now, years later, I can't walk past that cemetery without feeling a chill creep up my spine. The girl's face lingers in my memory. Her whispered plea echoing in my mind, "Please, help me." But the truth is, I couldn't. And I don't think anyone ever could. Story 2, High School Crush Turned Nightmare. In high school, Marco was the kind of boy who seemed larger than life. He wasn't just popular, he was magnetic. The captain of the basketball team. With a sharp wit and a smile that could disarm anyone. Marco had a way of making every room he entered feel like it was revolving around him. I wasn't part of the popular crowd. I wasn't quirky enough to stand out. Nor quiet enough to fade into the background. I existed in that strange in-between. Where people knew your name but rarely remembered you after the yearbook was signed. Despite this, I'd harbored a quiet crush on Marco for as long as I could remember. I told myself it was harmless. Just a silly infatuation that would fade. But every time I saw him, laughing with his friends or shooting hoops after school, my heart would flutter just a little too much. So when he approached me during a Friday night football game, I thought I'd misheard him. "Hey," he said, leaning casually against the bleachers. His voice was warm. His eyes bright with confidence. "You doing anything later?" The world around me seemed to blur. No, not really." I stammered. "Cool," he replied. As though we were old friends. "Let's hang out. Meet me at the entrance at halftime?" I nodded, unable to form words. As he walked away, I felt the stares of the other girls nearby. Their envy palpable. For once, I wasn't invisible. At halftime, Marco was waiting for me by the gates. His car, sleek and polished, glinted under the stadium lights. I slid into the passenger seat. Nervous but exhilarated. "You good?" he asked, glancing at me with a grin. "Yeah," I replied, though my hands fidgeted in my lap. He turned up the music. A mix of upbeat pop and smooth R&B, and we drove through the quiet streets of our town. The golden glow of streetlights streaked across the windshield. And for the first time in years, I felt noticed, special. We stopped at McDonald's. A random yet oddly comforting choice. Over burgers and fries. We talked about school, basketball, and music. He told me about his younger sister, Sophia, and how much trouble she gave him. "She's wild," he said, shaking his head with a chuckle. "Always getting into things she shouldn't." I laughed, feeling like we were connecting. For a moment, it felt like the start of a teenage love story, the kind I'd always daydreamed about. Then, the night shifted. As we left the parking lot, Marco's demeanor grew more serious. He drove in silence for a while, his usual ease replaced with something heavier. I thought maybe I'd said something wrong. But before I could ask, he pulled into a dimly lit side street and parked. "Hey," he said, turning to me. His voice was steady but firm. "I need your help with something." "Sure," I replied, though my stomach tightened at the sudden shift in tone. He reached over, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a gun. My breath caught in my throat. It was heavier and more menacing than anything I'd ever seen in real life. The metal gleamed faintly in the dim light, and the air in the car seemed to thicken. "Can you get rid of this for me?" he asked, his words calm but loaded with unspoken urgency. I stared at him, my mind racing. What do you mean?" "It's nothing big," he said, brushing it off like he was asking me to throw away an old soda can. "Just get rid of it. Somewhere no one will find it. You'll be doing me a huge favor." I wanted to say no, to demand answers, to run. But the way he looked at me, expecting compliance, yet daring me to refuse, left me frozen. "Marco, I don't think I can." "You can," he interrupted, his tone firm but not aggressive. "Trust me. It's better this way." He wrapped the gun in a cloth and handed it to me, his expression unreadable. My hands shook as I took it, the cold metal seeping through the fabric like ice. "I'll drop you at your car," he said, his tone casual again. "Just let me know when it's done." The rest of the ride was suffocatingly silent. My thoughts swirled with panic and confusion. Why did he have a gun? What had it been used for? And why me? When he pulled into the school parking lot, he gave me a small smile. "You're awesome," he said, as if this were some trivial favor. I nodded numbly, clutching the wrapped gun like it was a live grenade. As his taillights disappeared, I sat alone in my car, the weight of what I was holding pressing down on me. Driving home felt like a fever dream. My mind raced with possibilities. Could I go to the police? What would they think of me? What if Marco found out? By the time I reached my driveway, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My parents were asleep, their bedroom light off. I stared at the house, the gun burning a metaphorical hole in my passenger seat. I couldn't bring it inside. I couldn't keep it. Then I thought of the junkyard. My dad owned a scrapyard on the outskirts of town, complete with an industrial shredder. It was the kind of machine that could turn anything into unrecognizable scraps. I grabbed the gun and drove there, my heart pounding. The lot was dark and silent, the faint hum of machinery lingering in the air. I unlocked the gate, the metal creaking loudly in the stillness. The shredder loomed in the center of the lot, its steel blades gleaming under the moonlight. I stood there, the gun in my hands, my breath visible in the cold night air. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. But I couldn't go through with it. Instead of using the shredder, I wrapped the gun in a McDonald's bag and drove to a park on the other side of town. The playground was deserted, the swings swaying slightly in the breeze. I approached a trash can near the edge of the lot, every shadow and rustle of leaves making my heart race. My hands shook as I dropped the bag inside, the sound of it hitting the bottom louder than it should have been. I didn't look back as I walked to my car, my pulse thundering in my ears. For the next few days, I lived in constant fear. Every siren made me jump. Every knock on the door felt like the police coming to arrest me. Then, the news broke. Marco's sister, Sophia, had been arrested for her role in a violent robbery. The details were horrifying. She had used a gun to threaten a store owner and, when he refused to comply, had beaten him with it. No one had been killed, but the victim was hospitalized with severe injuries. I couldn't breathe as I watched the report. Was it the same gun? Had I just disposed of evidence in a violent crime? Marco, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened. He laughed with his friends in the hallways, played basketball like always, and never mentioned that night. But every time I saw him, my chest tightened with a mix of fear and anger. Years later, the memory of that night still lingers. I think about how easily I was manipulated. How quickly a simple crush turned into something far more sinister. What haunts me most is the uncertainty. Did I do the right thing? Could I have stopped something worse from happening? Or did I make it all worse? I don't have the answers. But I know this: trust is fragile. And sometimes the people we admire the most are the ones who can hurt us in ways we never expect. What would you have done? Story 3: The Gypsy Festival Incident. When my parents announced that we were attending the Appleby Horse Fair, I wasn't sure what to expect. I'd heard stories about the festival from relatives, vivid tales of colorful caravans, spirited horses, and the infectious energy that brought together families, travelers, and curious onlookers alike. For my family, it was more than just a fair. It was a connection to a past we'd largely left behind. My grandparents had lived the true Romani life, traveling with their wagons and embracing the traditions passed down through generations. But my parents had traded that lifestyle for brick-and-mortar homes, steady jobs, and a more acceptable place in modern society. So the festival was an opportunity to reconnect with our roots, even if only for a few days. I was 14 at the time, and the idea of traveling with my family didn't excite me as much as it once might have. My parents' insistence that this was an important cultural experience only added to my reluctance. Still, part of me was curious. The festival was everything they had promised: vibrant, chaotic, and alive. Horses paraded down cobblestone streets, their manes braided with ribbons, while vendors sold handmade jewelry, colorful scarves, and traditional sweets. There was music everywhere, from fiddlers perched on street corners to booming speakers that thumped bass lines through the crowd. But even in the heart of all that life, there was an undercurrent of something else. It wasn't fear, exactly, but rather the sense that this was a place where old traditions clashed with modern recklessness, a place where anything could happen. My cousin Ellie was the same age as me, though far braver. She had a confidence that I envied, a way of making the world bend to her will. That afternoon, she convinced our parents to let us explore on our own. "We'll stay close," Ellie promised, her brown eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Just the main streets." "I swear." Our parents reluctantly agreed, with the usual warnings to stick together and stay out of trouble. Ellie grabbed my hand as soon as we were out of sight, pulling me into the heart of the fair. We wandered through the stalls, laughed at the antics of performers, and sampled sugary snacks that left our fingers sticky. It felt freeing, being untethered from the watchful eyes of adults. For a while, I forgot my hesitations, caught up in the excitement of the day. And then we met them. They were a group of boys, probably a couple of years older than us. Ellie caught their attention first, as she always did, her confidence shining like a beacon. They approached with easy smiles, their accents marking them as locals. "You two enjoying the fair?" one of them asked. His voice warm and friendly. Ellie grinned. "We're loving it. You guys from around here?" The conversation flowed naturally, their charm putting us at ease. They teased us lightly, making jokes about the city girls trying to fit in with the travelers. It was all harmless. Or so it seemed. "We know a quieter spot," one of them said after a while. "Less crowded. Better view of the river. You should check it out." I hesitated, glancing at Ellie. Something about the suggestion felt off. But she shrugged and smiled. "Why not?" she said. "It sounds fun." We followed them down a winding path that led away from the bustling fair. The noise of the crowd grew fainter with each step, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant gurgle of the river. I felt the first pangs of unease. The boys were still chatting, but their laughter sounded hollow now, their easy camaraderie shifting into something more calculated. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just up ahead," one of them replied, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The path narrowed, the trees closing in around us. The sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. My heart began to race. Finally, we stopped at a small clearing near the riverbank. The boys exchanged glances, their earlier friendliness fading into something colder. "This is it?" Ellie asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Yeah," one of them said, stepping closer. "It's nice, isn't it?" Before I could react, one of the boys, the tallest and broadest of the group, grabbed me. His hands were rough and unyielding, locking around my waist as he lifted me off the ground. "Hey!" I shouted, kicking and squirming. "Let me go." Ellie froze, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. The other boys stood motionless, their expressions blank, as though this was just another game. I thrashed wildly, adrenaline surging through me. My elbow connected with his jaw, and he let out a grunt of pain. "Help me!" I screamed, turning to Ellie. She took a hesitant step forward but stopped, her hands trembling. "Ellie, please," I pleaded, my voice cracking. The boy tightened his grip, dragging me toward the bushes at the edge of the clearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized how isolated we were. There was no one to hear me, no one to help. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I slammed my heel into his shin, eliciting another grunt. He stumbled, loosening his hold just enough for me to wriggle free. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring. But I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and spun around, my eyes locking on his. "Stay away from me," I shouted, my voice trembling with both fear and defiance. Ellie grabbed my arm, and we bolted back toward the main path. My legs burned, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But I didn't dare slow down. The boys didn't chase us, whether it was my resistance or the sudden shift in their dynamic. They stayed behind, their figures fading into the shadows. When we reached the festival grounds, the noise and color were almost overwhelming. The crowd seemed oblivious to the nightmare we just escaped, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the terror still gripping me. We found a bench near the edge of the fair and collapsed onto it, our bodies trembling. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Ellie stared at the ground, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what to do, she whispered. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she hadn't helped me. But the words caught in my throat. The truth was, I understood. Fear paralyzes. We didn't tell our parents what happened. Shame, fear, and a strange sense of disbelief kept us silent. How could we explain it? How could we admit that we'd let ourselves be lured away so easily? 4 weeks. I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind. The boy's grip. The look in his eyes. The way Ellie had frozen, it haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bushes, the shadows, the dark possibilities of what might have happened if I hadn't fought back. I stopped going to festivals. What had once seemed magical now felt dangerous. The crowds and chaos a breeding ground for predators. Years later, the memory still lingers. I've tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just a group of stupid boys pushing boundaries they didn't fully understand. But deep down, I know better. There was malice in their actions. A darkness that went beyond youthful recklessness. I often wonder about the boy who grabbed me. Did he go on to hurt someone else? Did he ever feel regret? Or was I just one of many near misses in his life? More than anything, I think about Ellie. Our friendship wasn't the same after that day. The unspoken weight of what happened created a rift between us. One that time never fully healed. If I've learned anything, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And never let fear silence you. Tonight, our terrifying tales come to an end. But have they really? Is the mysterious girl in the cemetery still waiting for help? Could the story of the young man and the gun hold secrets we haven't yet uncovered? Or are the shadows at the Appleby Horse Fair silently watching even now? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is really happening behind these stories? Have you ever experienced something similar? We'd love to hear your story. If you love chilling and mysterious stories, don't forget to hit that like button to support the channel. Share with your friends. And subscribe so you never miss another gripping tale. The darkness always holds secrets. And Wolf Tells will be your guide to uncover them. See you in the next video, and remember, don't look out the window, and don't stare into the shadows for too long. Because sometimes, the shadows stare back.